Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we've been to see Sinners.
Yes.
A new horror film written and directed by Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler is a big name these days. He made his debut film in 2013, Fruitvale Station.
Yes.
And it was a good film. And was pretty much immediately kind of adopted by the mainstream. So he then made Creed, which was the sort of reboot and reimagining and sequel to the Rocky franchise that had Michael B. Jordan as Apollo Creed's son and Rocky in a supporting role. And trilogies come out of that. And then he made Black Panther, massive Marvel film, and I would imagine we probably still think it's the best Marvel film.
I think so.
Still, And now he's made Sinners, which is an original script, it's an original idea, set in 1932 in Mississippi. A pair of identical twins, again played by Michael B. Jordan, he's worked with him a lot. They're World War I veterans, they've been with the mob in Chicago, and they come back to the South, and they want to start up a juke joint, which is a term I wasn't really familiar with. Essentially, it's a black sort of house of fun and music and gambling and all that kind of stuff. It's a kind of informal term. So it's their big grand opening, they're setting everything up. There's a long period of the opening of the film, which is a kind of getting the band back together feeling and setting all this up. But before you know it, vampires turn up. So it becomes a supernatural horror film. This film has been shot partially in full-frame IMAX, 70mm full-on IMAX. We didn't see it in that form. It's been shown in that form in BFI, IMAX and things. We didn't see it in that form, and we didn't even see it in IMAX Digital in Birmingham. I think it may have been shown there, but I think those screenings we may have missed. We saw this in a regular screening. The trailer looked fantastic. We were really looking forward to it. What did you make of the film? Did you have a good time?
I had a great time. I loved the film. I was actually kind of moved, by it, and not by the narrative itself. I was actually just moved by what I was seeing. I mean, we've seen a lot of films by black filmmakers, that Beale Street Could Talk and things like that, and they always seem to me to be a bit off or overly stylized or kind of pretentious. I don't know how to put it. Whereas, to me, this seemed like a kind of black aesthetic, that kind of felt real in all kinds of ways, right? From, the music to the cultural references to the way of speaking to, the talk to the way that the sex was depicted. It just kind of felt vibrant and authentic.
I was looking at a thread on Reddit where it was about people saying they couldn't understand the dialogue. Can I have some subtitles, please? And there were people in the comments saying, I'm from Mississippi and this felt like home. Like this is how people talk. I mean, I didn't find an issue with understanding how anyone spoke. I maybe missed a line of dialogue here and there.
I think a few lines.
I think you do in any film. Yeah. Maybe a couple more here than you otherwise would. Maybe it's down to accent sometimes. But for the most part, I understood it, and I didn't find that an issue. And I enjoyed that kind of milieu. There were things that I thought were interesting and unusual. Like I didn't expect to see a Chinese American family at this time depicted having American accents, which they do. They have Southern Mississippi accents like everyone else. So I think you would. I don't think I've ever seen that before in a film set in this kind of time period, right? Like you would expect them to be direct immigrants with Chinese accents, having learned the language, but they appear not to be. Well, that's interesting.
Yes, and not only that. I mean, I think you see kind of the positionality of the filmmakers in things like that. Yeah, a kind of a sensitivity to that isn't heavy-handed. In the presence of the Native Americans at the beginning of the film, as part of the narrative, it's kind of, a perspective on a world that is inclusive, where all these people live, right? And, kind of, white people are amongst the people that live there, but they're not the only people that live there, as you as is so often the case in films of this kind. Yeah.
Although white people in this film, is that the case? I mean, I'm trying to think back to those opening scenes where we're seeing the town and things, and this is primarily a black town, and then there's also this Chinese
segregated.
family.
It's a segregated town.
Yeah.
And they go to the black section of town where the black businesses are.
Okay, I must have missed that kind of, sort of
and
detail.
That, that becomes clear at the end when the KKK posse come in.
Well,
right?
sure.
And they own the land and they own the building, and
Yeah. Okay. So what I mean then is, because you're right, absolutely, because we see them at the start buying this sawmill off the white guy who turns out to be the Grand Wizard of the KKK. But I think you're kind of saying what I'd mean though, which is that, as you say, this is segregated. So while people do live together, the white people don't live with them.
Yes, but what I'm saying is they're part of the narrative in a way. You see Smokey and the Bandit or other films kind of set in southern towns, and often you don't see a single black person in them.
Yeah.
So kind of this is a very it's a very different perspective, and I think it's a film about American culture, about black American culture, right? I mean, I think it's significant that it's set in 1932, that these men have just come from the war. It's a little bit like Remember My Forgotten Man number in, Gold Diggers of 1933, right? It has those references, and people who've come back from war, who've been used as cannon fodder, and who come back to nothing. Mm-hmm. Right, they've been to Chicago. You see, they've robbed from both mobs, from the Irish mob and kind of the Italian mob, and basically, kind of they're on the run back home. That is kind of part of the background for that. And I think, part of what was going on in my head in a way is, where does a black man at the height of the Depression and find peace or freedom?
There's talk of a black town, essentially, where all the businesses are black run, everything is black and black owned, and it's spoken of as kind of a promised land. Like, I've seen it exists. It reminded me of there was a Netflix documentary series by Killer Mike from Run the Jewels, where I think it was just one episode where he talked about black businesses in America and how a dollar spent outside of black businesses, like amongst white businesses or Korean businesses, stays there for a long time. It circulates through that community for a long time. Whereas a dollar spent amongst black businesses stays there for like 10 days. And then so black business kind of doesn't have a strong sort of infrastructure or kind of community and that kind of thing. And it reminds me of that, right? Like, this is kind of a mecca. This is kind of something unbelievable. I mean, there's stories of, was it Tulsa, where it was a very prosperous black town in the 20s or 30s, and it was attacked and destroyed because of that.
Sure.
It's like it's not an accident that this is the case in America.
I mean, and I'm not the most knowledgeable person about this, but even I got all these references. I mean, you see those really beautiful images at the beginning with the truck and the cotton fields and the sun going up, and and I don't know if it was something about the music or but you immediately think kind of Billie Holiday and George Gershwin, and the cotton is high, right? I don't know if it was just a few strands but anyway, I immediately kind of thought of that. So it is, to me, it is calling up all of that American culture, and in fact, it becomes part of the theme later on.
There you go.
Right, because the vampire says, "I want your music," right?
Yeah.
So kind of it is that whole thing about appropriating culture and
Well, it's interesting. So the film begins, before we get into anything, it starts off with this sort of mildly animated section with a voiceover that explains that various cultures throughout history have spoken of particular individuals who have apparently mystical powers with music, and their music can be so pure that it brings up spirits from the past and spirits from the present, spirits from the future, but as well as the good, it can bring up the bad. And so the idea is that this kid, this Sammy, who is the younger cousin of the two twins played by Michael B. Jordan, is this figure. And the music that he plays is going to bring out these demons, these vampires, as we learn that they are. I think I have a couple of problems with this film, and this is sort of one of them, where that theme isn't an issue, and the idea of music being so powerful and that kind of thing is not an issue. But I think the film gets far too interested or far too concerned with explaining things. So for instance, when Sammy starts playing in the juke joint that night, in the opening night, the voiceover comes back in from the start, and I really hated it initially. I was like, I thought, I really hate when films do this. Can't you rely on your audience? Can't you trust your audience to have remembered the thing that you set up at the start? So the voiceover comes back in saying, spirits from the past, spirits from the future will be brought up by a particular person. But then I did forgive it, because what the film shows then is so unusual, such a departure from what we've seen so far, that I think making it explicit what it's doing is probably justified, because what it shows is as the camera kind of roves through the dance floor, it shows someone in like Egyptian dress, and it shows kind of a modern day guitarist with an electric guitar, and it shows kind of figures, a DJ with decks, and then the music
and hip hop dancers
and the music becomes sort of augmented with hip hop beats and things. So I think because what it's doing there is so it's such a jump from what we've seen, which has just been set in 1932 from the start. I think it probably is justified to replay that narration, to clarify for the audience that exactly what we're doing here. Maybe I kind of forgave it that, but I do think that it gets into all of this detail with inviting vampires in. So once the one character, the Annie character, figures out these are vampires here, it becomes very clear that rule about vampires have to be invited in is in play. And there's all this chat across the threshold of the door between the vampires and the humans, and let me in and don't let them in. And I'm going, all of the potential tension here is being lost with this conversation. Very often, I like a conversation with villains. Very often that's a really exciting thing. But here, I think it was all falling away, all of that feeling.
I don't mind that at all. So, a couple of points.
Yeah.
First of all, I thought that moment that you were describing with like the past and the future and so on, I thought it was surreal and beautiful and kind of and meaningful. Yeah, it was like a whole history of black culture. Yeah, and kind of, the relays between generations and places and connections. Right. So I thought, that was just kind of a magical moment in the film. I thought the whole thing about, let him in, whatever, you needed that as a narrative element. Otherwise, the film's over. They just come in and they eat you. Right? Like,
you need it as an element, but you don't. So, I don't think you need so much emphasis and continued explanation.
But I thought it was funny, and actually it did create tensions, and it created tensions by giving different backgrounds. The Chinese woman, sees that her daughter's in danger, right? So will she let them in? Won't she let them in? She lets them in, right? Which she shouldn't have. So, I mean, I think all of those things, there are tensions created around that vary, from moment to moment in the film. The thing with the brother then becomes a thing where he's already in, you have to put him out, right? The other one, he's dead, so we've got to take him out, and then he's alive. I mean, those are just kind of an interesting way of creating kind of tensions around the progression of the narrative.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I had a real problem with the Chinese woman inviting them in at last, because I really had a problem with someone acting so stupidly. I think films, particularly horror films, often do rely on people being stupid at some point. But while they were being smart, they were essentially safe.
But what do you call smart? I mean, the thing is, and I think the film makes it clear, what we know about vampires, they don't know about vampires.
Yes, they do, because the Annie character does. No. She knows this
Well,
stuff.
she knows, but then you have to assume that people believe, they don't believe. Yeah, and people have other pressures, and there's doubts, and kind of, you can't expect characters in 1932 to know what we know about vampires. It's just wouldn't be the case. So
okay,
to me,
can we say that there's nothing to actually know about vampires because they're not real? Like, the law then is pretty much the same as the law now.
Well, but you're judging it on this woman not following the conventions. You're saying she's not being intelligent. But why would you expect her to be intelligent if she doesn't know?
But she does know.
No, she doesn't know.
What do you mean she doesn't know? It's very clear to everyone we don't invite these people in.
Well, she knows that if you let them in, you can fight them. She doesn't know that it's a losing battle.
I think, well, we can maybe disagree on that. I mean, I think it's absolutely clear that she would know that.
No,
the idea is that this is actually quite similar to that bit in Infinity War, the Avengers film, where they have Thanos and they're about to get the glove off him and save the day, and then the Quill character, the Star-Lord character, has an emotional moment where he realises that his girlfriend's dead, and he punches Thanos in the face and ruins it. And you're going, why did you do something so stupid? And you should have known better. And the film is trying to sell you on the character being overwhelmed by emotion, because in this case it's her emotion for, my daughter's going to be murdered. They've told me they're going to go murder my daughter. The idea is that the character is so overwhelmed with emotion that they make the irrational decision. I don't think it sells it. I didn't think it sold it in Infinity War either. I don't think it sells it well enough. Well, I just think, why have you been so stupid?
It sold it to me, and I didn't think she was being stupid. I thought she was intent on saving her daughter, and the alternative was to do nothing. Right, so kind of it had a logic for me. Yeah,
and I found it disappointing. It killed really a lot of the film for me.
Well, it didn't for me. I mean, I think this is one of the best films that I've seen in years. Actually, I think it's kind of rich in all kinds of ways, and I'd actually like to read a black scholar on how it connects to aspects of black culture that I personally don't detect. I think it's kind of an incredibly daring and unique film. I mean,
I think it's doing a lot that is quite novel, and I respect a lot of that, particularly things that it's doing with the music.
It's a horror musical. I mean, what was the last one you saw?
Yeah, Rocky Horror.
Well, I don't think that's a
no,
horror.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And it's not only a kind of horror musical, but what it's doing with the music is bringing in lots of different types of music and different influences. Like, I think you would kind of expect, as the film sort of primarily relies on the blues music of the South in the 30s, which is primarily what it's playing. But then you also have Irish dance.
Yes.
And you have kind of bluegrass at one point, and it combines these at points. It brings in hip hop from the modern day. Which is
I thought that was all absolutely brilliant, and sexy and dynamic and pointed, because I mean, what do they call white hillbillies? Crackers. I mean, what you get at the beginning is all like cracker music. Yes. So with Irish roots. Yeah. So I thought kind of the distinctions amongst the music, right? How this sappy, Christian-tinged, banjo-y stuff then becomes actually what is threatening, what is kind of scary, right? Yeah, and then, that music, that's the devil's music, which is sexy and joyous and fun, and, so actually kind of, there's that whole inversion of that thing. And actually, I thought Jack O'Connell was absolutely brilliant as the head vampire.
Yeah, I didn't recognise him at first. Once he came up in the credits, I went, oh yeah. But no, I thought he was wonderful. Really intimidating.
Yeah, so I think the film is kind of putting all those things into play in a way that is really novel, that actually has as a primary address, I would say, a black audience, which that in itself is, so unusual. I mean, in all kinds of ways, from the food to the music to the cultural history to kind of even, I thought, so they're twins, right? One is paired with a conventionally beautiful woman, but who's white, or who could pass this for white, who's in danger because...
We're told she has a black great-grandparent.
Yeah. And then, with another woman who's equally very beautiful, I think, but who's fat, right? And when was the last time that you saw the heartthrob of the moment, which you can definitely see Michael B. Jordan is, with a fat woman, in a way that wasn't comic, it wasn't played for a laugh or whatever.
No, sure, yeah.
He's really into her, right? So I think on all of those levels, the film is doing extraordinary things that we're not used to seeing, and I loved it.
I want to think about the theme of vampirism a bit, because you brought it up. And you, I think, were getting to a point where you were suggesting that it might be to do with. Well, actually, I don't know if you were going to suggest this, but like, I think a way of looking at it could be that black music, which is obviously so key in this film, has historically been taken and kind of adopted by white culture, and then kind of claimed by white culture and money made off and stuff. And there's very famously kind of Elvis is seen as, kind of taking black music, Eminem as well, that kind of thing. I think it's a way. I don't want to put words in my mouth. I don't know if you were going to suggest something along those lines.
Well, I mean, I think that there is a theme of expropriation, right? Because the thing that this film makes explicit, which is not necessarily true in other vampire films, right, is that it's collective, right? Yeah. So what one knows, they all know. Yeah, which is not the case in Interview with a Vampire. Like,
no.
And so the guy ends up speaking Chinese and all this stuff. So kind of, and what they want is the music, right? But of course, kind of, they take the music, share it amongst them, and in the meantime, the act of movement from one thing to that other collective white thing is the death of individual black people. Yeah. So, so I thought that was kind of very interesting in the film.
The thing I kind of thought about the vampires or vampirism as a theme, what it brought out was about kind of freedom. Right at the end of the film, in the mid-credits scene, I do think it should have actually been a final scene and then the credits, rather than the credits start and then we get this mid-credits. It was a big enough scene to be, an epilogue. Anyway, in this scene, we have the Sammy character, now in 1992, as an old man, played by Buddy Guy, who is a real blues guitarist. He's very well known. I don't think he's much of an actor, actually, based on this film, but he's a very well known and influential guitarist, and maybe that is enough to justify his inclusion in the film, playing this role. He's an old man, and he's visited by two of the vampires who were left over, who escaped from the carnage back in 1932. One of them is the one Michael B. Jordan character, and the other is his girlfriend, Mary, the white character, or passes as white. And they reminisce about that night, and they all say that was the freest I've ever felt.
Yeah.
Right, that one night before it all kind of came crashing down, I can no longer see the sun. Buddy Guy was saying, I get flashbacks to that night. But that night was as free as I've ever felt. And that to me is like what the film is kind of doing with the idea of vampirism. It's kind of, rather than it being, maybe it's ultimately tragic because it condemns them to live in these certain ways afterwards. But at its peak, it gave you all this freedom. It was seductive and it was sexy and it was exciting, which is what that night was.
Yes, but I'm wondering, how that allegorizes, because, that's a night in a protective space with people eating soul food and listening to blues and interacting with each other and being sexy and fun and safe. Yeah. As soon as the vampires come, it's all over. Right. So, and the vampires are white, or at least they're initially white. It's white instigated, right? And actually, that distinction is done from the very beginning, because you see the guy being chased by Native Americans, right? And finding help or, shelter with the other white people, who immediately turns into vampires, right? So,
And who are KKK.
And who are KKK on top of that. So I think kind of, there are all those things running on in the film. And I think the other thing is that, what I loved in all those musical scenes was the joy, the sexiness, the rhythm, the pacing. The camera would always be moving. You had like that sense of excitement, but a sense of excitement that still enabled you to see. I love the actress who plays Preacher Boy's girlfriend. She's really...
Jamie Lawson.
Yeah, she's got a wonderful number, and she's beautiful and sexy and slinky, And actually, that's another thing that it made me think about this film. I bet you that, there are actors who've been waiting a lifetime to play these roles. I think she's one of them. I think Delroy Lindo is another. I mean, I've never seen him better. He's kind of like completely alive and charismatic and, so excellent. And, you know, I wonder how many roles like this one he's had, right? Like, yeah, so kind of, I don't know, I thought it was tremendous.
I had a real issue with the look of the film that you were just praising. I didn't like a lot of it, and you were saying, you know, because we mentioned that it was in IMAX, partially in IMAX.
I have issues with the way the film is filmed.
Okay, well, so what my issues then, let's say, because we were talking about it being shown in IMAX cinemas and partially shot in full frame IMAX. There's a thank you at the end to Christopher Nolan, which I assume has to do with advice on shooting in IMAX, because he does it so much. I think it was when we saw Tenet, which, you know, was Christopher Nolan and was in full frame IMAX, that you were complaining that you can't frame a shot for different aspect ratios at the same time, because you're going to shoot this in full frame IMAX, but then to show it on widescreen cinema screens, to show it on DVD, you're going to be cropping this down. How can you frame two things at once?
Yes.
Right? And I was in slight disagreement with you. I thought you can, but you know, I take your point completely.
I mean, you know, the fact is, it's been done for the last 50 years, right? Because often what you'd have is a frame within a frame in the camera for the way that it would look like on television, and for the way that they would then look like on the screen. Yeah. Right. So
it's not a new problem.
It's not a new problem, but it continues to be a problem. Yeah. You know, because what are you choosing? Either, you know, the television screen or the widescreen. You can't frame it perfectly for both at the same time. Yeah. You know,
so what? The reason I bring that up here, because like I say, I disagreed with you to some extent with Tenet, but here it came up to me as an issue because I can only assume which scenes and shots were IMAX based on, you know, kind of the way that they look, or the way that the scene goes, kind of what would be.
I wasn't looking for it. So
I wasn't looking for exactly, but it's just kind of thinking about it afterwards, realising that obviously they must have been framing things in IMAX, certain things. That particular shot that you're talking about, that we mentioned, where Sammy starts playing and the camera roves through the juke joint, and we see all this surreal imagery of people from different eras and different cultures. I thought that was a lovely idea and a really badly executed shot, the way we saw it, because all of this was at sort of head and shoulders level, head and shoulders distance.
I agree.
People were staged not in the kind of depth
that's true,
because the camera's moving around, and you know, actors and characters are being you know, kind of choreographed quite specifically. This is a long take it's doing it in as well. You know, you could have, for instance, like the floor, the kind of the crowd parts, and we see something in full height, you know, and maybe that is the case, that things do look that way in the full IMAX version because you have all this extra height that we didn't get. We don't see that here, though, and the way it's been cropped for here, if that is the case, this is a scene that's been cropped. I'm having to caveat it all the time with, I don't know for sure that this is an IMAX scene. Must be, though. The way that it's been cropped or shot here is in this head and shoulders stuff that you don't get this expression. And I think actually an awful lot of the film suffers from this middle distance, head and shoulders type shooting that I find really inexpressive. No, I'm not going to say lazy. That's way too harsh. But it could be doing so much more with its imagery.
I mean, the only problem I had with the film in that was that scene. Yeah, and I wonder if it had to do with money, or, you know, it kind of it didn't look as good as you can imagine it could have, and it could have been more expressive. That's not my problem with the way that the film looks. Actually, my problem with the way that it looks was the way the faces themselves were lit.
Yeah, my other problem.
You know, which I mean, I thought, like, you know, this is a black filmmaker working with black actors. You know, and either the luminosity of the projection that we saw wasn't good enough. It might, you know, very well look better on a TV screen, right? But what we saw was the old problem of filming black faces, which is that there's not enough light. So you don't get a sense of textures and skins and shadows. It's like so much of the face ends up in black. Right, so I thought, invisible.
I noticed this immediately, and I was looking for it in terms of, was this the projection? And I thought, no, it's not, because actually the projection we saw, while not an IMAX or an IMAX digital projection, was beautifully bright in kind of daytime scenes. You know, and actually the reason that I noticed this immediately was because in that opening scene, which is set, you know, the day after all of the carnage, you have Sammy walk into the church where his dad's preaching, and the church is bright white painted, and there's sunshine out the window, or like a bright sky out the window, which his dad is stood in front of, and that contrast of this very bright surrounding and the dad's quite dark face, he's got quite dark skin himself. I'm going, I can't see the guy's face. This cannot be beyond the wit of man to start lighting and shooting black people. I know that it's an issue because dark skin isn't as reflective as light skin. It by definition doesn't reflect as much light. It's harder to make it light. But we must be able to show black faces in ways that don't look silhouetted. I mean, right at the end of the film, when the night of carnage is over...
Well, it's not that we must know. We do know.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, just think of any Denzel Washington film, and he would never have allowed himself to be filmed like this.
Yeah.
Right, like kind of...
The last scene, or the scene rather, just after the carnage, where the last two people alive are the one Michael B. Jordan character, Smoke, I think, and Sammy. They're stood outside the juke joint. And, you know, it should be it's a moment of relief and tension has gone away. Finally, we've done it, and you know, we've lost so many people, but we're still here. All that kind of stuff. And Sammy is stood in front of this tree that's far away in the background, but he just blends into it. That, you know, I mean, what? It's so careless.
Yeah, I thought the person, paradoxically, who suffered the most from this was Michael B. Jordan.
Really?
Yes, I do.
That's interesting. I didn't feel that.
I did.
Yeah, go on.
I mean, you know, kind of, you're sometimes looking at his face, and, you know, the shadows and planes of his face are not evident in the way that they have been in other films, right? And maybe it's because this is more difficult to shoot in the sense that it's all night shoots. Yeah, it's all meant to be set at night, right? You know, so it might kind of have brought up kind of different technical problems, you know, but on the other hand, I think he is your star. Right, and there is definitely a thing in the film that the lighter the skin, the better lit they seem, right, and that is a technical problem to be resolved that the film doesn't, I don't think, resolve it.
Yeah, it's like it's a natural, like I say, problem that things that are darker reflect less light. That is what makes things darker, right, by definition. But we have to be able to do better. Like, you know, you look at a behind the scenes shot of any movie, and you look at the kind of the lights and the reflectors and things that are being blasted onto people's faces. We're not having to deal with natural light here. We can do what we want. Surely we can do something better than this.
Anyway, I thought that was a problem.
It's a real problem. I mean, it's a problem that we have talked about a lot before.
Yeah.
And it's just and there are films that, as you say, like if you think of a Denzel Washington film or something like that, like we don't have the problem with this. Like films have done it very well.
Yes.
This film should be doing it much better. A film that is also, I think, so reliant on light and dark, and you know, like setting things at night, or the sunset coming up, and you know, flames, and there is a lot of play with light, I think. And then there's this kind of real inattention to the way it appears on people's faces. I mean, actually, you know, I was thinking, again, right at the start, I was thinking, in that shit scene in the church, I can't see the guy's face. What's going on here? And this is a Sammy character. Yeah, and you could sort of tell, it was in shadow, you could sort of tell he had this huge scratch mark on him, big scratch marks on his neck. I'm going, I can't really see that. And then he turns at one point, and light hits it, and you see it clearly. It's clearly an effect the film is going for. It reveals very clearly this thing. So, like, the film knows what it's doing, and it also knows how to light in this one moment very clearly. It's a real problem. I
think maybe part of the problem might have been the fact that Michael B. Jordan is playing twins.
Yeah.
Right, so you have to light to match their interactions. You know,
okay.
I wonder. I mean,
I don't know.
That might be a reason.
The thought. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just speculating.
We can't complain about that too much still.
Yeah, I think you know, we're touching too much on the negative, and I think it's a really great film.
Yeah,
actually.
I didn't.
Yeah, well, I thought it was exciting. I thought it was novel. I thought it's like finally, like, you know, a wonderful serious film about vampires. Yeah, kind of that's using the genre to convey kind of other things. The only, well, you know, I have a few quibbles, as you know. Another of my quibbles was the thing about the baby.
Yes.
I thought that was so sentimental.
Let's just clarify as well for our audience. So this is the Smoke character again. The Michael B. Jordan characters are called Smoke and Stack, and the Smoke character has been in a relationship previously with Annie, and she's the larger black lady you mentioned, and they've lost a baby together. We see that, and the baby is buried outside her home, and he returns, and the returning on the face of it is to do with, we need you to cook for our great opening night. You're a wonderful cook, but of course there's all of this history between them that is being brought up at this time, and yes, I thought when you get her talking about, there's someone waiting for me on the other side, so if I get bitten, kill me, it's okay.
Yeah, there's someone waiting for you. I mean, I didn't mind, the initial scene where, they had a baby that they loved and lost, and, you feel that that's earned the emotion. But then all the other stuff, we'll be reunited in heaven, I thought.
Well, what I really liked is that... what I really liked is that you do get a family reunion, as you so often do at the end of films, but the family reunion happens in the afterlife.
Yes.
I mean, even at the end of Gladiator, when he winds up in the afterlife, you don't see him meet his family. I know you do. You do, actually. He's going through the fields, and he does run into his family, I think. So it actually is the same as Gladiator.
Anyway, it's a bit clever in the sense that both twins get their girl, and there's a happy ending, just in a different place, right? Yes.
Oh, and also you get the fantasy of setting up grenades and Tommy guns and taking down the whole KKK chapter in the local town. Which I thought, you know what? As a fantasy, fucking let's have it. I like it.
I loved it. I mean, and I actually wondered, I kind of, one of the things, I wish I'd seen it with a black audience, because, I can imagine the response to that, really.
Because actually, I remember when we talked about Queen and Slim, which was that film with Daniel Kaluuya and Jodie, I can't remember her name, as a couple who, they're on a date and then they accidentally kill a cop and then they're on the run. And we were saying, of course they have to die at the end, right? It's a tragic thing. You can't see it going any other way. They tried to make their escape, but they just couldn't. And it seemed perfect for that film. And a lot of response to that film from kind of black audiences and black critics rested on, why can't they have got away, right? Why do we have to sit through more black pain sort of thing? And I did think of that when he was gunning down the KKK here, because I thought, yes, why can't we just indulge in the fantasy for a moment that even though we lost so many people during this night of terror, we can also have a moment where he goes fucking Rambo on the KKK, and it is very rewarding.
The film is also playing at a very particular historical moment, which makes it, to me, seem all the more powerful. So, just at that moment that all the DEI initiatives are being removed, at the moment where Trump is initiating all of these racist legislation, cuts to funding, equality measures, all these attacks on civil liberties that affect black and Latinos more than any other sector of the American population, you have this film. Which is very much about kind of black empowerment and black culture and black revenge, even, So
can I ask you, because you say it seems particularly apt at this moment, is there any time in the past 50 years when you couldn't have said it seems particularly apt?
At other times in the last 50 years, it wouldn't have been made. It's as simple as that.
Okay. But would it have been apt to have been made then, in the same ways?
Sure. I mean, I think you have some of this in the blaxploitation films of the 70s, right? And that cycle lasted, 5 years, really? And they were low-budget films, kind of aimed specifically at kind of a black audience and playing mainly in, urban theaters in large cities. This is as mainstream film as you get, with a major star of the moment, right?
That is a difference. And it's enormously successful. It's budgeted at something like 100 million, and it's made more than twice that so far. And it's also got great word of mouth.
Yes.
I think it's had a very good second week kind of deal.
Yeah.
So
I think it's great.
Doing very well. I think it's not as good as I wanted it to be. I do have significant problems with it, and I sort of found it thematically incoherent or too badly thought through, I don't mind it as a half decent genre piece, but I wish it had all that tension and stuff that I felt was lacking. And when it comes to the kind of cultural context and cultural references and everything that it's building on that you're praising so heavily, I just don't know enough. So I'm not going to criticise any of that, and I'm not going to particularly praise it either. But I just I know that it's there, and it will reward someone who knows a great deal more than I happen to about the kind of nuance and details of this time in history and the cultural relations.
Well, I found it, as I said, you're watching these things, and I was just moved by their existence.
Yeah.
Aside from the execution, which I think was also very good. All right, shall we end it here? We agree to disagree?
Yeah, for
sure. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and YouTube Music. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.